Good evening, everybody. Welcome to School Board U on this beautiful August night. We'll get you out of here soon, I promise. I'm Susan Holson, the Director of Education Services at VSBA. I'm joined this evening by Carrie Lamb, our Director of Operations. Carrie, you want to say hi?
Good evening, everyone.
As you can see on this slide that I'm showing right now, if you are having any technical difficulties with the podcast, please do call into our office. Carrie is taking care of mission control, and she'll help you out if you have any problems. Otherwise, we're going to assume everything is working, and we'll continue on. For those of you who have not attended VSBA webinars before, let me just explain how we operate. We always welcome questions and comments, but we don't have voice-to-voice compatibility, so you should be able to identify there's a question box in the portal that you're using. Any questions that you have throughout the evening, please feel free to type in your questions. We'll get to them either in real time, or if there's anything we need to research a little bit more, we will follow up with the email that we send out after the program. I want to assure you that all questions are completely anonymous, so if you think you're telling tales out of school, nobody's going to be able to identify you. We're here to help. At the end of the webinar, you'll get a link to a very brief, I think it's 3-question evaluation about the program, the content, the technology, all of it. And we very much value your feedback, so I hope you'll take a minute to fill that out. As I mentioned, early next week, we'll send out an email that'll give you summary information from tonight's program. We'll send you the slide deck. We'll send you any other resources that we talk about this evening. And then they will subsequently, the video will be archived on our website and our YouTube channel. So the big question is, how are we doing? And by that, I mean, of course, your school district. One of the hardest questions to answer, perhaps, and really the most important. If somebody new moves into town and they hear you're on the school board and they call you thinking that they're about to buy a house or wanting to get their kids settled into school, and they start asking you questions like, well, we hear the schools in town are really good, but tell me how you're doing. Do you know how to answer that question? It's a hard one. But it's also part of our job as board members to be aware of what's going on and to be monitoring the progress of our schools. So we're going to try and dig into that a little bit tonight and help you set a path on that particular aspect of board work. So just to put everything in perspective, because in a way with monitoring, we're starting at the end. Before you can really know what you're looking at, you need to know where you're headed. And so we strongly urge every school district and or supervisory union, supervisory district to have a vision statement that describes what it is you're wanting to work towards, and a mission which gives a sense of purpose and explains why you exist as a school district. Then you need to have goals, and those goals should reflect the mission and the vision, but be quite specific and measurable so that you know whether you're making progress. And finally, you want to be assessing progress toward the goal. And just off track here for a second, the whole issue of vision and mission and planning really affects every aspect of board work, including your budgets and any of the structural pieces that boards take on. So moving on to monitoring, let's talk about how we set those goals. Those goals are really important. You don't know what you don't know until you know what it is you're trying to look for. So how did we do last year? Did we have goals last year? Did your board have goals? And if so, what progress did you achieve on last year's goals? Did you move towards those goals? Did you stagnate? Did you slip a little bit? It's important to know all of that, to take stock of where you are now. And then annually, really, to identify areas for continued focus. So if there are areas where your board did not come up to the standards that you had expected, you want to make sure that you put some resources there and also monitor it closely so that you know how the district is doing. You want to get input from your district leaders. The administration is critical here, right? Because first of all, they have to support the goals. And second of all, they're really the link to providing you with the evidence. So what are their priorities for the coming year? And how do they integrate with the board's priorities? And ultimately, in unison with the administration, you want to end up with 3 to 5 measurable goals. And as I said before, you really need to be specific about what they are. What are the next steps to being able to know that we're moving in the right direction? And how will we know if we've attained these goals? And it should also be on here, whose responsibility is it? So we need to have some accountability. Boards are accountable to our communities. Administration is accountable to the boards. We need to have some accountability so that we know where to turn in order to make changes. So we start with goal statements that reflect the mission and the vision of the district. You want to have 3 or 4, maybe 5 very realistic goals that have a time frame associated, where you can clearly see that you've allocated resources to be able to make progress on those goals. And then you want to make sure that it's a clear communication between the board and the superintendent. Then there's a broad statement of what's to be accomplished. Remember that long-range goals require long-range planning. So we all know that public education does not move fast. And while it is important to make sure that we address every student in the system, if we see issues at a particular grade level, we're not going to fix them overnight. And we know that. But we need to see that we are at least making some progress. So what are we going to be monitoring? Well, there are a lot of goals to monitor, right? We have student outcomes. That's probably the most obvious and arguably the most important. But we also have financial oversight responsibilities to our communities. So we need to know that the administration, that the district is being run within the parameters of the budgets that have been established and approved by voters, and that the resources are being allocated to support student outcomes and whatever goals we've established. We make sure you're checking on your policy manuals. For those of you who are in newly organized districts, that's happening as part of that process. But if your district has not recently undergone any changes, it really should be part of the board's work, or at least committee work, to be reviewing all of the policies in your policy manual on a 3 to 5 year schedule, by which I mean stagger them. Don't say, okay, year number 3, time to review all of our policies. No, of course not. You take about a third of them each year, or a fourth or a fifth, depending on your schedule, and make sure that they're up to date. Some of them will not need any changes. Some of them may. Similarly, your evaluation of your superintendent is a goal, or at least a important aspect of monitoring the health of your district. You want to make sure that your superintendent is clear about what his or her goals are from the board, and that you all are in agreement as to where you are currently and where you want to get to, and then you get to watch the progress happen over time. And at the bottom of the list here is revisiting your vision statement. Maybe it's changed. Maybe the community has changed and wants different things from your schools. So periodically check in and make sure that that still resonates with the community's values and where you expect and hope to be going. So let's take a minute here, and in your question box, I'd appreciate if you would just answer this simple question. What are you currently monitoring in your district? And Carrie, if you would mind reading out some of the answers when they come, that would be helpful.
No problem, I'm on it.
Thanks.
I have one who's come up. It says budget to actual.
Good. And hopefully when you're looking at your budget to actual, you are presented with the information in a way that you understand and that the comparables are meaningful. So if you're looking at 1/4's worth of budget, you should be looking at 1/4's, 1/4's worth of actual expenses. You should be looking at 1/4's worth of your budget, or ideally that particular quarter, because not all expenses obviously come in equally throughout the year.
Okay, I'm also seeing smarter, balanced results.
By that, I assume you're talking about SMART goals, which means that they are measurable and you are watching progress in how you're achieving your goals. And again, those can be student outcome goals, those can be administrative goals, those can be a range of different kinds of goals.
That's all I have at this time.
Okay, so we'll move on from there. But the point is that ideally all boards are measuring everything, but we know that isn't always the case. And so this hopefully will give you a broader net to cast when you're talking at your retreats or your planning sessions about what it is you need to be doing to be effective as a board and to be suitably accountable to your communities.
Susan, I've gotten an adjustment to the responses.
Okay.
The person who said smart goals said SBAC, not SMART goals.
Okay, so SBAC, thank you for that clarification. SBAC are test scores, and we do tend to underplay the value of test scores in this state because they are only one data point, but they're an important one. And so every board should be receiving that information from your administration when it's available. But that is, as I said, just one measure of student performance. And so we encourage you to look at others as well. And we'll talk about that in a little while. Thanks, Carrie, for that clarification. So what is important for your organization to measure? And how can you most effectively measure what's important? Those are maybe the hardest questions of all, right? What are the best indicators that we have that when taken together give us a picture of what our students know and are able to do? So as I said, the SBAC score is part of that. It's not the whole picture. How can we translate the indicators, the data that we're getting, into a measurable numerical goal that we can use as a benchmark to know where we're starting? We all have heard principals' reports talking about how many students participated in athletic activities and other co-curriculars, who was in the school play, or at least how many, those kinds of things, field trips, etc. And those are all nice to know, but they're not really demonstrating progress unless one of your goals is we want to assure that 75% of our student population is involved in at least 2 co-curriculars. That's data that your administration can collect and provide to the board at a regular meeting. So again, emphasis is on measurable. So all board members, you should be asking yourselves these questions, remembering that the indicators need to be ends in themselves. They have to be about results for students and not about, well, we've added this program, or we've developed this curriculum, or we've added, our high school now has Chinese language. The efforts made by the schools are really important, but those specific things need to tie in, or should tie in, to one of your goals, in which case what you're really looking to monitor is not that the program exists, but is it being well utilized, and is it producing the results? Is it helping your students with their college readiness? Is it helping your students prepare for middle school? Whatever the issues may be that you're facing as your overall mission, you need to make sure that's tied into the indicators that you're monitoring. And then it's important to ask these questions too. So what are the key roadblocks or challenges to doing all of this? And how can you work around them? What are some of the key implications that if you've got teachers coming in to present their new math curriculum, what are the implications of that presentation for the board to be able to monitor how students are doing and what the district is offering to students? So those implications could include things like you're showing board leadership, or the board has goals for itself too, right? So is your board learning? Are you getting better at being a board? Are you communicating well with your community? Are you available to them for their input? Are you staying the course because you believe in the goals that have been already established, or are you flexing because you're getting new input? These are all really important questions that boards should be asking themselves on an ongoing basis. So here's some questions that you can be asking yourself as you're developing a strategy for monitoring, and also for making sure that you're identifying your goals the way you want to be. What is this action or initiative intended to improve? Which goal is this action aligned with? That's an important one. If you're going off in multiple directions that aren't focused on your goal, your big end goal, your big vision, then you're really diffusing your power as a school district. If you've already agreed on what the goals are, then those should be the primary focus. Then what does it take to do or implement this well? That's where you're going to rely on your administration being the experts about education, and they're going to help you with defining what kinds of indicators are available and make recommendations about allocating your resources to make sure that you are funding the goal as well. And then what's the impact? How do we know what the impact is? So we have anecdotal evidence. Yeah, the kids are happy in school. Everybody's staying late and involved in co-curriculars. That's great. But how do we know that we're seeing not just a few happy faces, but that we're getting closer to our goal of having 75% of all students involved in 2 co-curriculars? And I just pulled that completely out of the air. I'm not suggesting that that's your goal. What are those roadblocks? And what are the key implications when you're getting data from your administration to help you monitor your goals? What are the implications of the data? So knowing that your high school graduation rate is 82% in a vacuum doesn't really help with anything. But if you know that 5 years ago it was 78%, then you know you're doing something. The things that you're doing are working to move the needle on the goal that you're measuring. So I'm going to rely on the VSBA strategic plan as an example throughout the rest of the presentation. I know there are a couple of you who are attending who are on the VSBA board, so I'm not telling anybody any secrets here. The strategic plan is available to all members to review. So the board's job here is to identify the goal area and create the goal statement, right? In the case of the strategic plan, I pulled on one goal area is support for good governance. The goal statement that we want to be able to demonstrate is that school boards are supported in achieving good governance. And then we have a whole list of indicators that support that. And one of them is that 80% of new board members attend a VSBA training in their first year as board members. And for those of you who are relatively new, and hopefully those of you who are not, you know that we do put a concerted effort into addressing the needs of new board members as they're coming up to speed to understand the scope of board work. But developing that indicator statement is joint effort between the board and the administration. right? So the board comes up with the goal statement, but the administrator is providing possible indicators, and then collectively you agree on the ones that you're going to be monitoring. And then the superintendent, the administration, has to provide an array of relevant services and supports that improve school board functioning. So in this case, it's not really the superintendent, right? In this case, it's the VSBA staff to our board, to make sure that the boards are aware of what we have to offer and that board members are taking advantage of them. And how do we do that? How do we report on that? And how does our board monitor that? So we have a grid that we use, and the vision statement, the VSBA vision statement in this case, is across the top. In your case, that would be your district statement. You would have goal areas, goal statements, what indicators you've agreed to with your administration, and then accountability. What is it for the board to do? What is it for the administration to do? And then everybody's really clear on how we're going to be monitoring. So populating that tool for you, and our board members will attest that at most of our board meetings, the staff presents what we call our strategic plan monitoring tool that looks a lot like this, and it shows exactly what we've been up to and why. And the why is the important part. You want to make sure it's linked to the district's goals for your kids, goals for your system, goals for your board. So, as I said, support for good governance, the goal statement, school boards are supported in achieving good governance. The indicator we're looking at here is that 80% of new board members attend a VSBA training in their first year. The board's role here is to receive and analyze participation reports from administration. And that can look like a lot of different things. Ideally, it's a top-level executive summary. So they don't need to know, and you don't need to know as board members, the details of which kids are doing which co-curriculars. What's important is the aggregate here, that you know that you're making progress. You had 65%, you're now at 70%, and the goal is 75%. And the administration's role here is to provide an array of relevant services that supports and improve school board functioning in this example for the VSBA. Similarly, we have a goal area at VSBA called education leadership, that the VSBA is a highly regarded voice for public education and good governance. What are the indicators of that? Well, one of them is that we have influence boards to have established clear vision statements for education within their district. That's something we really believe is necessary. It's sort of the North Star for what your district is doing. The board's role is the members of the board are actively encouraging all of our member boards to utilize VSBA services and monitoring the utilization of those services. In the case of the example I've been using throughout about co-curricular activities, the board's role there is to watch the progress of the number of kids. So maybe we're seeing an increase in the number of students who are doing one co-curricular activity, but the goal, if you remember, was to see 75% of them doing two. Well, if we're seeing 65% doing two and an additional 5 or 8% that are doing one, we're moving the needle. We're not there yet, but we're moving in the right direction. So let's try this again. How are you currently monitoring? What information are you getting? When, where, how? How do you know what's going on? How do you know that you're making progress or not?
Okay, everyone, type that into your question box and I will read them out anonymously. think everyone's a little shy tonight.
Yeah, probably distracted by this gorgeous weather. Okay, so I hope that you will take time to think about this, even if I'm putting you on the spot here right now and that's making you uncomfortable. Do think about this. What is it we're getting from our district, from our administration, that is providing us with evidence that we're moving towards our goals? That's a very basic question. And sadly, it's one I don't think we ask ourselves often enough. But all of the principals reports and the teachers coming in to present and all of those pieces should really be tied to monitoring a goal. Otherwise, the board doesn't really need that information. Nice to know, sure, but not critically important. Okay, in an interest of not taking up an August evening, I just want to show how this works out on an annualized basis. So continuing with the two strategic goals that we've been talking about, the two goal statements, we lay out a calendar, and boards do this as well. So your individual board, if you do have a retreat in the summer or fall, as many boards do, and we certainly encourage that because it gives you an opportunity to take a step back and look at the big picture, you'd lay out, or your board chair would lay out a grid that looks like this, a calendar, and identify what data points you're going to get in which months at your regular meetings. So in this case, supported in achieving good governance. So in August, because we do a lot of summer retreat facilitation, I'm going to report out to my board, well, this is, here are how many of our boards participated, and here were the outcomes, and here's the feedback that we got. In November, similar, we're going to report out on the attendance at our annual conference, at our regional meetings. And in the spring, we'll report on the new board member trainings and what's going on there. Similarly, with the next goal, you can see, you get the point. You lay it out all in advance, helps build the agendas for your board chairs and your superintendents. And it also is a good expectation for all board members to know what's coming. So we talked about SBAC scores. Well, they come out once a year. So the superintendent knows when you're going to get that information, and that's going to get plugged into that month's meeting. And that will be an agenda item, and you will spend I hope you'll spend some time looking at your scores and analyzing them as a board, with the administration leading you through that process so that you can question anything that you're not sure about. So, are there any questions? Is this helpful? How can I make it more helpful?
I'm showing no questions right now. Let's see. I think you've been very clear, Susan. No questions at this time.
Thank you. So let me just remind you, though, I'm always available. You can pick up the phone and call me in the office, at the VSBA office, or shoot me an email if questions come up after the fact, as they often do once you've had a chance to process. So I know we have had, this is the last of our FY 2019 First Thursday webinar series. September begins our new fiscal year, which I know is different than school board's fiscal year for reasons I cannot begin to explain to you. And we're going to make some changes with the format for the coming year. Oh, but first, before we get to those, I want to remind you that we have our regional meetings coming up. Registration is open on our website for the regional meetings. You can see your regions here. If you're not sure which region your district is in, there's a checklist on our website on the regional meetings registration page. We are coming to every one of our 11 regions this year. We hope you will attend. The agenda is being finalized right now, but we anticipate that we'll be doing some work around the annual snapshot, also reviewing some bylaws, proposed bylaws changes, which will need to be voted on by the entire membership. And similarly, I'm putting in a plug here, an advanced plug for the VSBA Vermont annual conference, which we do in conjunction with the Superintendents Association, which this year is titled From Vision to Practice, Governing and Leading for Student Success. So this is very much focused on board level work. It's going to be a little bit later this year than in the past, November 7th and 8th. And of course, during that time, we also have the VSBA annual meeting where bylaws and resolutions are taken up by the full membership. The conference itself will have 2 days that are packed with keynotes and workshops, and maybe the part most people value is the networking opportunities with other board members from around the state. We're also going to be hearing this year from a number of students about their experiences in Vermont education and in some cases what they've been doing since graduation. So it's going to be a great conference. I hope you'll be able to join us. As I said, the webinar format is changing a little bit. We're going to continue to do the first Thursdays. However, we have been conflicting with some boards' regular meetings. It's unavoidable. So we're going to try something new next year. We're going to run them from noon till 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Hopefully you'll be able to join us midday for lunch break. And if you're not, of course, we always have them archived on our website. Here are the scheduled topics subject to change, but we'll be addressing things that we think are timely and relevant for board members. These are the questions that we get often. So resolutions for the VSBA, addressing board behavior, budgeting and financial oversight, the annual snapshot. We did do a program on the annual snapshot last month. The Agency of Education is continuing to populate the data there, so we're going to take another look at it and go in a little deeper, because by January we'll have had 2 more sets of data uploaded. We'll give you our annual legislative update in early February. We'll hear from a very successful community engagement board story, new member board service. We have a lot of questions constantly about open meeting law and executive session. We're going to address some unique issues for smaller boards, and we'll talk about effective meetings. So mark your calendars. Those registrations, at least the first half of them, are available now. And as I said, we're always available to talk to you, to email with you. Here is all of our contact information with the website, our emails, our phone numbers. Please stay in touch. The only way we know how we're doing is when we get feedback from our members. And with that said, I want to thank you for participating tonight. I know it's hard to give up another evening when you're on a school board, and especially a summer evening, but Vermont's children appreciate it whether they know it or not. Please take a minute. As I said, when you exit the webinar, you'll be directed to a brief evaluation, and I need your input. Otherwise, I don't know how I'm doing. So please let me know. Thank you very much. See you in September.